Hi students, my name is Nikhilesh. I teach English in Battacharya College in Alipurduar district. In this session, I will talk about Nissim Ezekiel's poem Night of the Scorpion, which is in Core Course 3 of the NBU English Honours syllabus. Let me begin with a short introduction to the poet. Ezekiel was an important Indian English poet from the second half of the 20th century. He was also a playwright, an art critic, a literary critic, and an academic, having taught in different colleges and universities in India and abroad. He was Jewish. His family belonged to the Bene Israel community, which has been in India for more than 2000 years by some accounts. His father was a college professor and his mother a school principal. As a schoolboy, Ezekiel preferred the works of Western poets such as Eliot, Yeats, Ezra Pound, and Rilke to Indian English poetry. His early poetry, composed in the 1940s, was marked by its use of formal English, which was controversial because of its association with colonialism. Later, his poetic career changed directions. Night of the Scorpion was composed at a time when Ezekiel was experimenting with a less formal style. The poem is in free verse, there is no set meter, the lines do not rhyme, and they are of uneven length. The language is colloquial. The poem is in the form of a first-person narrative which describes how the narrator's mother was once stung by a scorpion. Please remember that a scorpion does not bite, its sting is in its tail. More precisely, the poem is not a mere description of the incident, but a recollection of it. The opening lines of the poem read, "I remember the night my mother was stung by a scorpion." Note the word remember. There are clues in the text of the poem which suggest that a few years have elapsed between when the incident took place and when it is being recalled. I will examine these clues in detail later in the session. Last year, the only question from Night of the Scorpion included in the end semester examinations was about Ezekiel's representation of motherhood. So it focused on the last two lines of the poem where the mother says, "Thank God the scorpion picked on me and spared my children." So in this session, I will talk about the setting of the poem, the narrator, and the other characters. It is evident from the text of the poem that the incident took place in a mud house in a village during a night of endless rain. The narrator says of the scorpion, 10 hours of steady rain had driven him to crawl beneath a sack of rice. And it was evidently still raining when the scorpion parted with his poison, described as flash of diabolic tail in the dark room, and escaped into the night. He risked the rain again, says the narrator. The walls of the house are described as sun-baked or mud-baked in an alternative reading. Both amount to the same thing. It was a mud house. The neighbors who came to help are described as peasants, that is farmers, pointing to a rural setting. There was also apparently no electricity in the area. The neighbors searched for the scorpion with candles and with lanterns. Although the victim of the scorpion's sting was in considerable pain, no attempt was made to transfer her to a hospital or a health center, which suggests that the incident took place in a remote area. The description of the neighbors as peasants at the very first mention has another function in the poem. It establishes a difference between them and the narrator's own family. It suggests that the narrator's family did not belong to the same class as the farmers. The feeling is strengthened by the description of the father. The narrator describes him as skeptic, rationalist. A skeptic is someone who questions or doubts accepted opinions. A rationalist is someone whose opinions and actions are based on reason and knowledge rather than on religious belief or emotional response. It is true that the father, beside himself with worry at his wife's pain, abandoned all these principles and ended up trying, as the narrator says, every curse and blessing, powder, mixture, herb and hybrid to try and alleviate her pain. His skeptic rationalist self only came to the fore when he poured a little paraffin upon the bitten toe and put a match to it. I watched the flame feeding on my mother, the narrator recalled. The farmers, on the other hand, remained secure in their traditional beliefs. When they arrived at the house, the narrator recalls, they came like swarms of flies and buzzed the name of God 100 times to paralyze the evil one. And after searching for the scorpion in vain, they clicked their tongues. With every movement that the scorpion made, his poison moved in mother's blood, they said. Later, the narrator says, they sat around on the floor with my mother in the center, the peace of understanding on each face. In sharp contrast to their calm acceptance of the situation stood the father, who was clutching at every solution offered to him or that he could think of, even allowing a holy man to perform his rites to tame the poison with an incantation. In the end, none of it worked, as it took 20 hours for the poison to lose its sting. The mother survived, but only after going through prolonged agony. The clash between superstition and rationalist belief, and the moment when the former overpowers the latter, provides some of the tension that exists in the poem. But it is not the only one. The poet also plays on the tension created by juxtaposing a child's first-hand experience of a terrible night and the dispassionate recalling of that experience later in life. One can imagine how terrifying it would have been for a child to see the mother in pain, the father at his wits' end, and the neighbors milling around the house looking for the scorpion. And the poem makes full use of the vivid impressions of the child of that incident. We have already seen how the poem describes the moment when the scorpion stings the narrator's mother, and the descriptions of the different characters and the setting. Here's another example. When the neighbors search for the scorpion with candles and with lanterns, the narrator remembers them throwing giant scorpion shadows on the sun-baked walls. In such lines, the poem has the breathless energy of an eyewitness account. But the detailed analysis of the event and the actions of the different characters makes it clear that the narrator is a grown-up. To give a short example, the child could not have described the father as skeptic, rationalist. It is the work of an adult. That is why I said at the beginning of the session that a few years have elapsed between when the incident took place and when it is being recalled. It was a child who witnessed the event, but a grown-up who recalls it. This explains why the narrator does not betray any bitterness in recalling the event, not even against the scorpion. For one, the narrator knows that it did not end in tragedy, the mother survived, and also because the narrator has had the time to understand the compulsions of the different characters. The scorpion, for example, only came into the house to take shelter from the rain. The father tried everything that he could but was helpless, and even the farmers, with their superstitious beliefs, did what they could to help. The beliefs of the farmers are in fact expressed in very poetic terms in the lines, "May he sit still," they said. "May the sins of your previous birth be burned away tonight," they said. "May your suffering decrease the misfortunes of your next birth," they said. "May the sum of all evil, balanced in this unreal world against the sum of good, become diminished by your pain. May the poison purify your flesh of desire and your spirit of ambition," they said. So what else do we know about the narrator, except for the fact that the narrator is an adult looking back at a childhood event? Well, not much, I'm afraid. As readers, we have a tendency to identify any first-person narrator in a poem as the poet himself or herself. But be warned, it does not always work like that. Sometimes a poet may assume the identity of a character, which could be fictional or even historical, and speak in that character's voice. Night of the Scorpion is often read as a poem relating an incident from Ezekiel's own childhood. This may or may not be true, and it's not important. A poem is a work of imagination, and any character in a poem resides only in that imaginary world. Even if Ezekiel was writing about himself in Night of the Scorpion, it would have been a projection of his own self. It might be more worthwhile to go through the text of Night of the Scorpion and see what it tells us about the narrator. In the poem, the narrator remains unnamed. We do not even know the gender of the narrator, whether the narrator is a he or a she. We can surmise that the narrator is not an only child, because the mother at the end of the poem speaks of children in plural. We also know that the narrator has the gifts of description and analysis. The discerning reader can also detect a sense of humor which allows the narrator to juxtapose the events in the manner that it's done in the poem. So that was my analysis of Nissim Ezekiel's Night of the Scorpion, a poem that firmly focuses on the past, but a past filtered through the consciousness of the present. I hope this discussion helps. Best of luck with your preparations, and thanks to Radio Salesian for bringing this session to you.